Welcome to another edition of Summoning Insight. I thought we'd kick off the show today with some conversation from your perspective on where this year of League of Legends is going to land historically, because I think with the whole pandemic and it being online, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on where, like, the level of seriousness we should take results, how many caveats are going to exist in 5 years from now when we look back on this season and talk about the general competitiveness of it, or what is going to be happening in the future.
Basically, this is actually quite similar to what I've actually done a video like this, but only in CSGO. So to be fair, most people who don't have any overlap will have never heard this before. Basically in CSGO, that is a game that had the ultimate stigma against online play, because if people don't know, we still had online play in CSGO. I mean, up to as recently as last year, like ECS, for example, the tournament which the operator of which now works with us in Flashpoint, they were still online even. Like, they would have an offline final, but to qualify there, so it was one of the decent size, medium sized lands, you had to qualify online. So since in CSGO, we've always dealt with online play. The big problem we've had this year, when everything's gone online and we're having all these online tournaments, is basically everyone in the pro scene pretty much just took the perspective of like, right, so that we don't have to take all these super messy online upsets and weird matches and times where like the number one team in the world by far on offline is it like just okay online. We just kind of all agreed to just ignore all online results. So even though we were having them, we just ignored them. So the trouble we're having in CSGO is if we just ignore all online results, then there was just like, I think 2 lands. No, realistically, there's more. There's maybe 5 lands this year. And then you have to just say, what, there's no CS history after that. Like in 10 years, am I going to look back and say, oh, yeah, 2020 was like, it went right up into the playoffs of AM PDT, then yada, yada, yada. And in 2021, it was really interesting. Like, no, I have to obviously say what happened since. So basically, since we're in this bizarre scenario where we can only watch online play, in a weird way, while we're watching it, we have to pretend as though it's offline play in terms of the status we give it. But the issue is, the second we get to real offline play again, in a world where all the tournaments are offline, we are, and this sounds harsh, but it's in line with what you're asking. We are going to look back and just say, there's an asterisk on that period. Every result, has an asterisk on it. So, for example, I mean, I'll be fair. G2 doing that mad comeback in spring, there's an asterisk. Maybe they would have done better in the playoffs. Maybe they would have done worse. We'll never know. So the point I'm bringing up here is, I do have a lot of qualms about like the online nature of play, especially I think all the best of ones. I actually think that's maybe more interesting topic to transition into, is the best of ones. To me, it's clearly a terrible format, but the fact that both regions, for actually most of the splits, it's too close coming down to the last week. Like, that just doesn't suggest that, like, either the game's so bad that nobody can be good enough, which I've never bought that angle, because I watch LCK and I watch LPL and you have this clear stratification. You go and watch those leagues, there isn't like 7 teams that could be first place. There's like 2 or 3. They're the teams you'd expect. Then there's, the block of 3 or 4 teams who should be battling them. Then there's the bottom block who can never beat anyone. The idea that the West, we're just supposed to believe the results are just completely different and we're supposed to ignore the best of ones. Because in my opinion, LEC, which we'll talk about on this episode, has been the ultimate example of why best of ones are bad. Because basically, as we've seen, every single team at some point in time was relevant to this split. Like that just beggars belief, I realize it's because the region's got a lot of talent, sure. But the problem is it strains the format then. Best of ones work best, think about it logically, when there's no parity. Because if the old Cloud, think of Spring Split's the best example, right? Cloud9 would beat pretty much everyone in a best of one anyway, because they're just that much better.
Yes.
But if you get even that much closer, because realistically, what are your odds on winning a best of one? I think it's comparable to that famous thing where, when No Limit Hold'em Poker, rather, the one that was famous on television. One of the reasons fans actually loved to watch that, even if they weren't super into card games, is because if people don't know, even if Monty has aces heads up, and I have 7-2 offsuit, the worst hand in poker, and we both go all in before the flop, I have something like a 9% chance of still winning. Something mental like that. Like, people don't know like how big the odds are. So even if Monty's the best player in the world and I'm the worst, I can beat him in that scenario. Like, I'm starting to get that vibe about best of ones now. I feel like they're just not very... They just don't really tell me much. Maybe it's this meta as well, but something's off about it to me. So I'll add that into the kind of when we're saying about thinking on this year, because realistically, you can say it's good for viewership. I think it's worse for the quality of the actual. Like, I don't feel like it's a sport when I watch these best of ones.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that, first off, there was a public post from the LEC commissioner that was talking about best of one versus best of three a few weeks ago. I don't know if you saw that.
Didn't see that, no.
Yeah.
What did he say? What was the gist of it?
I'd have to pull it back up. One of the things he did say, though, was that...
The conclusion was they keep best of one, I assume.
Correct. And I think part of this was because that one of the aspects was that I know we've always disagreed with is the philosophy that best of ones create more upsets, and upsets are exciting. And so they want that to be a feature. And that's not what I like personally, but I do understand the logic behind that, as it were.
Here's the irony, though. Are you ready? They forget to complete the sentence. Best of ones create more variance. More variance makes it more likely to have an upset. Therefore, upsets are exciting, so we like best of ones. But wait a minute, what's the most exciting upset? A best of three.
Yes.
There we go. The counter to it all, isn't it? Because if people don't know, by the way, I've put my money where my mouth is on this topic.
Yep.
When people in CS do a weird best of one upset, right? Obviously, I say, well, you have to factor in it's best of one, maybe the team wasn't prepared. If anyone saw the last CSGO major, we had an enormous upset where a team that wasn't even supposed to make top 8 made the final, and I gave them massive props. I said, as a result, when they won their quarterfinal match against the team that was ranked number 2 in the world, I said, this is probably the biggest upset in the history of Counter-Strike. You have to give mad props to this team, whether you like them or not. But the problem is, if that was the best of one, it's very easy to poo-poo it, isn't it? Just dismiss it.
Yeah, hold on. I got it right now. So
same as, by the way, if people didn't know, in LCK, when for example, Katie Rolster did that mad upset of I think it was actually wasn't it DRX or someone insane that they actually beat the best of 3 with when Smeb was playing Maokai. I forget who it was. It was one of the top teams.
Yeah.
That makes that a way more baller result. If that was the best of one, you'd go, well, whatever, it was just a stupid Maokai pick. Dude, he did that for the whole series.
He was playing support
made it
too.
That made it way more legit to me.
Yeah, it was. I mean, he says in here, let me just link you this. He says, are best of threes better to accurately determine the best team? Of course, but they also demand a huge time commitment from the viewer. And I guess it really depends on the league because, I think there's an argument given the quality of matches that you wouldn't want necessarily to watch a best of 3 in LCS, but I think I could have done with a few more LEC best of 3s so far in this season in particular, because I think the quality of the games was super high.
Dude, you're telling me at the end of that Rogue versus Mad game, you weren't I've had enough of this, actually. Wouldn't want to see a game 2 after that, because after all, it's obvious that only Rogue could have won this game. No, the first thing you were thinking was shit, it's the best of one. Well, whatever. And remember, this is one premise I've never bought, Monty. One thing I hate about esports is, I've made this point in the past, but people don't seem to realize whenever you talk about this, and I'm a historian, so I can tell you this, whenever you talk about the past, you can make up any explanation you want because it doesn't have to have predictive power. You're explaining what already happened. You're just basically deciding, right, out of a million possible reasons, I'm saying it was this reason. And by the way, if you're a good historian, you never say it was one reason. You say it was this reason, these contributing factors, of course, you give as much context as you can. What people always do in League of Legends and esports generally is they find one sort of good reason or explanation, and then they just eliminate all others. So, for example, when people say best of ones are better for viewership, what in the world do you mean by viewership? Because, for example, say that example I just gave you there, Rogue versus Mad Lion, super exciting end to the game. Are you telling me that the viewers were right, can't wait for whatever the next game is between definitely not the two best teams? No, in that scenario, the viewership would have loved to see game 2 and game 3. I'd also throw in a few other factors. One, where's this whole angle that it's only about viewership? I get that that's the current model because you're trying to get maximum concurrent viewers, viewing hours for the month. Yeah, that is the current cynical model, but that isn't going to be for the history of the game. So to me, that could actually be quite a myopic approach to make it only best of one, because right now you get more success. Maybe you can build towards something, because I've never understood the angle that like you were saying, this guy says here, but he doesn't know if people would want to watch more or something like that. Dude, think about how many people watch how doesn't an NFL game take 3 hours to play?
Yes. I would say most American sports take 3 hours to play. If you're watching
a football game is literally
football, baseball, hockey,
2 hours, let's say, for that one with all the rest. Yeah. I think it's pretty standard to watch for 2 or 3 hours, in my opinion. Yes. I told you, I've never understood it. To this day, I still don't get it, Monty. I know why in the past we treated esports events as though it was the tournament that you were watching and not the games, because it was just one tournament that took place on one weekend, and your favorite team might go out in round one, so you can't tune in for that. You tune in for the whole product, and you watch it from match one to the final. Ideally, that's just the old model. In the modern day, I always bring this up. If you're going to start popping off like they always do and compare it to the English Premier League, to the NFL, nobody in the English Premier League watches all the games. That angle would be stupid in the English Premier League. But I don't want to watch the bottom gate teams play. Just don't then do. In fact, they're not even on television, so I wouldn't worry about it. Like, what is this? Like, in the NFL, like, they don't carry all the games on television, you know? You have to watch in your area. Like, I feel like that's why I'm bringing the point up, because I would acknowledge his premise initially. I could believe there's enough casual fans don't want to watch more than a best of one, or they want to watch currently the 7-8 games. But I don't know that fan base is who you're going to be at in 10 years. So I think you should start pivoting towards that personally.
Yeah, I think the argument is, like, for them, that they have said repeatedly that they want fans to be fans of the LCS, or like that was a while ago that they said that, as opposed to just specific
Can't
teams.
They just keep that inside? Listen, use the inside voice for that. Just say that in your own brain, but then go, well, I wouldn't be as presumptuous to say that out loud, of course. No, we love having Fnatic and GT. They always have to say it, don't they, Riot? They can't help themselves, mate.
I think, like, the difference is, though, there really is an audience that will watch, like, all of, or as much as of LCS and LEC combined, like the major Western regions as possible, and they're not just following specific teams.
Not a choice right now.
Yeah,
that's the joke, Monty. They only got watch 2 games otherwise, don't they?
But
there is no choice.
Yeah, I think, like, it's interesting to consider it, because when you have the viewership that you've trained to do that, as opposed to following specific teams. Because I agree with your sports examples, but I don't think a lot of NFL fans are watching more than maybe like the best game of the week and then their favorite team playing, right? They're not sitting there watching every single NFL game. Or if they are, it's like through Red Zone, where you're watching all of them simultaneously. Yes.
It's why most people, I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sure in America, because I know SportsCenter was a huge thing. It's why in England, the most famous football show isn't the live match. It's Match of the Day, because Match of the Day, if people don't know, is a highlight show at the end of Saturday that just rounds up the best highlights of football in the Premier League that week. And so, listen, admittedly, it was invented originally for the era where you couldn't watch it, or, you know, the games weren't on television. But that's actually the most popular show, because the idea is, who has the time to watch every game? Yep. You want to get the highlights, though. In the same way, like, if I'm watching like some of the other regions where I don't care about the like middle teams, I just watch those like highlight packages on YouTube that are like 8 minutes long or 6 minutes long or something. So I see the team fights. How do you spin it back, though? What would your answer to that original question be? Like, how will we view this year? Because I get the feeling you were going into tertiary housing, but I don't know what you were thinking of when you.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Like, it's the same way that I don't really think of the Season 1 World Championship as a legitimate result, because it lacked all of the pomp, it lacked all of the gravity.
Yes.
It also didn't have, you know, the major regions really competing of Korea and China at that point in time. The game had fully globalized, so it's felt more like a beta World Championship. It
even had an online qualifier, if people don't know. That's exactly. That's, by the way, if people want to call it a World Championship, probably the stupidest aspect, which is that someone could literally have just cheated online, or even just DDoSed. Like Dignitas could have been DDoSed. Yeah. That's why they weren't there, you know. That's how silly this whole thing is. Because I agree. My angle I always use is this. I always just say, to forget getting into the weeds on it, I always just say, listen, Season 2 Worlds was closer to anything after than Season 1 was to Season 2 in offset. That's my kind of like line in the sand on that one. But I get your premise.
Yeah, and I think that too that if Worlds is going to be this LAN in China this year, that for me, that's really the only legitimate result of the entire year. Yes. But the problem is that we got there and we qualified through all of these online events.
Sure.
In the West especially. So how is that going to affect teams? Like, you look at a team like Mad Lions, who when they went online started performing significantly better. Part of that was that they were gaining experience as rookies, right?
Sure.
But part of that, definitely the G2 performance in playoffs was, I don't think that result happens on LAN in Spring Split. And I think that if they go to Worlds, it's an entirely different kind of pressure at LAN that they haven't seen before. And would this team have made it there without the online component? That's a question. And the other question is, will they flop bigger because they didn't have the LAN performances to kind of get experience in that environment going into Worlds? So I think it's going to be really wacky. I think it's going to be incredibly unpredictable. And so it does have, I mean, at least it will be LAN, we assume. And so at least we have that going for us, that I still think like the best team will probably, in the world will be able to win that event and will be attending that event, most likely, given how things have played out in the other regions. But we are going to have some very weird results at Worlds, I think. As
Put
a
it
result
this way,
of this.
In line with what you're saying, the way I would formulate it is this. If we have Worlds, awesome. That will, to some degree, sort of save the year because it's the biggest and most important event. The problem is it will have had the least legit qualification of any Worlds since Season 1 World Championship. It wasn't World Championship, Season 1 Championship, like we were saying here, because it was online, unfortunately. So that's the part that will somewhat spoil it a little bit. But as you say, I think it's very unlikely that the absolute best team won't be there. So in that sense, like, as long as we get to the LAN and then it's proper League of Legends, it'll turn it around. Like, I often think of it this way as well, actually. For anyone who's too worried about this conversation, think like, oh, is this whole year a write-off somewhere? I'll just tell you what I have always famously said to many people who work for tournament organizers in CSGO when they would have LANs, and the first day they would shit the bed completely. Like, the internet would be dodgy, or the sound was having issues, or the observing, which is like the camera being moved around, was bad. If they ever had issues or delays or players complain, I would always say to whoever the person was from ESL or DreamHack, listen, I know in this moment you feel like the sky's falling, it's all burning, etc. But as long as you get to the last day in the playoffs and you have that be proper and real capturing, and even better, good games and memorable games, no one will remember day one. Everyone will just remember the end of it and how awesome it was and all the great matches. And largely, you look over the minor. So I think it'll be the same. As long as Worlds is really good, we'll all just mentally focus on that. Listen, we can obviously, along similar lines, have corollary thoughts like, but would, for example, I'll pick up a random name, would Fnatic have qualified if they'd have been online? Because there's an interesting discussion, right? But it'll just be hypotheticals for me and you on shows, I think, at that point in time. Fans won't care as much.
And also, I think the later you get into the tournament, obviously the teams that can handle that pressure will be performing, and most likely they're going to be veteran LAN teams anyway. Like, it will be, I think, surprising to see a really deep Mad Lions run at Worlds or something of a similar nature. So I think
it will give, though, Mad Lions and Rogue, etc., if they go, chances now, I mean, Rogue's obviously going, chances to actually show that they were legit what they did earlier in the year, though, or at least hinted it. It doesn't necessarily show it, it just hints it, doesn't it?
Exactly. And I think, we'll probably have some weird group stage results, and I think the end of this is that we're going to have some arguments about, was this team that got knocked out in groups the best team from that region to have attended, or was that due to online results?
Sure.
But I think that as we get into the playoffs, it won't matter. And that I think at the end of the day, the top 8 are still probably going to be super strong, and it won't be that different. And at least we will get one solid LAN result out of this year, at least among the Western teams. Like LPL obviously has been back more in that mode right now, and so is LCK, so it's a little bit different as we go from region to region. I do want to talk more about that best of 3 thing, but Danan from Golden Guardians really wanted to come on the show to discuss the playoff format as well for LCS, because I think there's a lot.
Luckily, his team definitely didn't benefit from it being online. I mean, listen, I saw Closer play in the past when he was pretty good as well. But I'm just going to say, a lot of those wins that they had, Monty, looked exactly like an online game. Dude, I think I've played some of those solo queue games where you win and your team's way better than theirs, your comp's better than theirs, but that fucking Lee Sin from hell just doesn't stop wrecking everyone on the whole map. And you're like, God, give me a break, please. I'm in bot lane 2 kills up. This guy's got 7 kills. That's what Golden Guardians games feels like. So let's bring this guy on. He must know all about it.
All right. Let's take a couple of minutes on a break. We'll add Danan over to the show, and we'll get back to you guys in just a couple. All right. We're here with Danan, the GM of the Golden Guardians, who is once again coming on this show for our LCS portion. And he very specifically asked to be on the show this week because you are a proponent of the 8 out of teams heading to the playoffs summer split LCS format. And you wanted to make your case because a lot of people, including me, and I presume Thorin, are not fans of this.
Wait a minute. One, what do you mean he requested to... By the way, this is an invite only, Sean. So we'll go ahead and put that out there. I get this premise. Actually, Monty means he had a good topic and it tickled Monty's fancy. So fair enough on that one.
Yeah.
And he's sort of vaguely, loosely connected enough, almost sort of a coach. Definitely was just getting Cloud9 water back in the day. But we'll pretend that that's all legit. So, okay, here's what I want to ask, though. Is, when you say that you're in favor of it, it's one thing if you want to, make a case for it or just say, here's a reason why they might do it, sir. You actually think this is better, though, than having 6 make the playoffs? Let's just be clear at the beginning.
Yeah, so I'm in favor of better playoff formats in general, to be clear.
Okay.
And I definitely can say I'm confident this format, for what we're trying to do with the goals that we have, is like infinitely better than what we were doing previously.
Okay, so I agree that. So I think if I can presume your argument, the argument is that because you're trying to have a robust playoff system to get the best 3 North American teams to the World Championship, that you believe that this format is superior.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 6 different layers to like all the different goals we have.
Yeah, sure.
In a summary, yeah.
Right, start with one then. Pick one that would be a good. Okay? How about this? Okay, listen. This might seem we haven't prepared before, so I'm not putting them on the spot here intentionally. We just have to because it's a talk show. What I would say is this: coming out the gate, what is your best argument? What's like the number one reason you think this is better?
It's the argument you guys already made, which is that best of one already isn't like a really great way. Like, it's not a way that we can confidently guarantee like really, really concrete seeding every
so
split,
similar,
right? Like
single limbs, the same issue for you, right?
Yeah, exactly. But both of those, they don't complement each other, right?
Yeah, agreed.
In my opinion, we actually need double elimination if we're going to keep using best of one. Which right now, like, we can go through best of one, best of 3, and like go different directions. I think it's obvious. I think everyone can agree. I think both commissioners have agreed that best of 3 is obviously better for competitive integrity. Like, it's going to be more true to what actual seeding should look like at the end of the split. But viewership metrics and broadcasts, like all the different challenges
stuff we talked about earlier,
push them to best of one, I guess. Because of that, we can complement it by doing a different playoff format like this.
Sure, and I'm totally on board with you for all of this.
I'm confused now though, because that's the problem is we weren't talking about double elim though, dude. Like, I've always been in favor of double elim. I've won it from day one, but it's the 8-team angle. Like, why is the 8-team part necessary? What does the 8 teams do?
Okay, so there's a couple things. First and foremost, we are, as you can tell, retiring the gauntlet. We needed to find a pathway that made sense to still be able to wrap in those like super niche cases like the C9 getting 7th, right? Those teams that don't necessarily make playoffs in summer historically have had a pathway to Worlds after summer playoffs. So this was like a good compromise for that. Simultaneously, this is, in my opinion, I can't speak for the league. In my opinion, we're admitting that our regular season seeding doesn't do an amazing job, and that 6 seed is highly contested. We had a 3 or 4-way tiebreaker in spring for it. I think Europe just had like an almost 3-4-way tiebreaker for 6th again. Yeah. I actually don't know. I feel bad for Excel in this case, where I think their tiebreaker rule basically says whoever won most recently against the other one wins the tiebreak.
Yes, that's the way it does it in Europe.
Excel has the exact same record and actually an even tiebreaker against Schalke, but because they lost to them recently, they just don't even get their chance at Worlds. It's gone, right? I think our format does a good job compromising on all of those fronts to find a window where, like, you can argue, like, do 100 Thieves, and especially in this case, I can understand Dig, everyone saying they're 5 and 13. Why do they even get a chance? We're not building use cases specifically for giving Dig a chance. The idea is, what if it was last split where the 8th seed was 8 and 10? The 9th seed was 7 and 11. It was Team Liquid, by the way, where they were 1 game outside of that 8-team spread. And just to be clear, 100 Thieves and Dig don't have like an easy pathway to go to Worlds. They have 3 best of 5s that
still have to be very good. Yes,
they cannot lose whatsoever because they have single elimination from the losers bracket, and they have to face the 6, 5, 4, and 3 seeds effectively to path there. Like, they have to like unequivocally example that they are a really good, capable team.
Right, basically, just to summarize that in case anyone got lost, right? First of all, when he was referencing earlier, because he just threw it out there as if everyone's going to know, he means years and years ago where Cloud9 famously had to win from like doing really badly. I think it was like the summer of season 5 or whatever. And then they finished 7th, but that was enough to get them in the gauntlet. And then they did the miracle run with High as the jungler, if everyone knows what he's referring to. So what he's saying there is he doesn't want a team, Schalke is a good example now, if they catch fire at the end of the split and they look really good, like, dude, like right now, Schalke looks like they could be like the 4th best team in Europe. Like, they're not even just like playoff contenders. But if they'd have lost even like one more game, they could not have possibly made playoffs. It would be impossible. So what he's saying is, bearing in mind we're trying to get teams into the playoffs, but then we're using the playoffs as a qualifier for Worlds. He doesn't want a world where a Cloud9 in the past, that might be too long for go for some people, or Schalke now, just have no chance to make it if they're really good at the end. But I sort of get that. So you're also tying it into, it's not as though they make like, it's not like we just have like an upper bracket that's double elim and everyone goes upper bracket and then you get the 2 chances and therefore it's like, oh, why do they get that? You're saying even if they go to the playoffs, because they get the last spot, they basically get like, you're going to have to prove that you're amazing if you want to go to Worlds. Like, as you're saying, dig 100 Thieves. If they make it to Worlds, you'd have a hard time saying they didn't earn it, because they're going to have to win some serious best of 5.
Yeah, and there's no margin for error.
As long as you define it like you did, that it's about getting the best teams to Worlds.
Yep.
I can see the premise you're coming from there.
Yeah,
because obviously I'm going the other angle, which is, if I see that you've only got 10 teams in the league and then 8 make the playoffs, it does to some degree crush a lot of the narratives. It makes it so that basically you just have to not be the worst team pretty much. And also, you know, it just looks silly on the face of it that 80% of teams make the play. You know, those are pretty standard reasons. But I like your angle, because the key thing I think you should always do with every format is ask, what does the format select for? It's one of the reasons why, if you notice, the reason I don't like a lot of formats is they like unduly punish you, which maybe ties into what you're saying, for your performance in essentially the qualification phase. Like, I've never, like, for example, at my beloved CSGO majors, I hate the fact that in the qualification phase, which in the past was just group stages, if you get one wonky best of 1 upset, all of a sudden the dream final between number 1 and number 2 in the world doesn't happen, and they meet in the round of 8, which is like, why would anyone want that? Who in the world would want that? Like, no one, basically. But if you set the tournament up like that, that is a possibility. So you have to know going in what you're selecting for. I agree with you.
Yeah. I guess like my confusion with this format is a lot of it is that, look, I'm totally on board with you, and if that's the reasoning and saying, hey, like the regular season and best of ones does introduce a lot of variance, but we're doing it for viewership reasons. I think there's a broader conversation there that this is how they've trained the audience to be, and that retraining people to be fans of teams instead of the leagues is going to be more effective in the long term. That both provides, I think, more staying power and a better competitive format, but you know, that would be a huge change, obviously, in terms of the way that everything is operated right now. And it would take years in order to develop that in a very specific plan. So in the absence of that being an occurrence, I think that my issue is like, okay, so you got me on board. We have these best of ones. We think of them more as a qualifier for this best of 5 double limb bracket. I agree that the way it's done is actually quite good, because you have the buys for the top 2 teams, right? And so those teams are TL and C9 are in a very comfortable position. The bottom 2 teams, as you say, have to win an extraordinary number of best of 5s back to back to back to even have a chance of qualification. So I think it has the right weighting and preferences. But my issue is this. If we think about it this way, right, then why do we take these best of 5 teams and then chuck them into the World Championship, where it hasn't been announced, I assume we still have a best of 1 group stage format? Because it needs to be internally consistent for me. If we're saying that this is a ramp up of, this is how we really test teams, is like best of 5s, then I can't have each of our regions select that way and then go straight into best of 1s, which half of the major regions in the world don't even play.
Yeah.
To me, that's crazy.
Expecting internal consistency. So there's your first mistake. And then secondly, Monty, here's the obvious corollary, but I was going to keep this as a trap card, but I'll throw it out there now. Here's one of the reasons I can agree with what he's saying now, Monty, because when I agree at the end, I can go, so we all agree this is much better. Now, why is it World's double limb? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it would take years, and we'd have to have a lot of meetings. Like, that's what I was going to do that as a trap later, but go ahead.
Well, okay. But the trap is also in the best of 1 group stages, right? Where,
of course,
look, there is so much League of Legends going on right now around the world. And one thing that I really appreciate that Riot is doing, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but they've started to have those like debate shows among a representative caster from each of the major regions where they debate around a certain player. Have you seen that, Thorin?
Mm-hmm.
What's it called?
Shit.
I've never seen this format. Problem is, I only watched it.
Shit.
I tend to watch the.
It's not shit. I was me exasperated.
Which broadcast is it on?
It's on YouTube. I think it's called Lane X Lane by Lane.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called.
And what and is the idea, like, you know, each person puts forward the best player from their region in that role or something?
Yeah, they've been having debates on, I think that's what it's called.
Chat says champion select.
Champion select.
Is it part
that's
of
right.
Lane X Lane, or is it like its own?
No,
thing?
it's its own thing. I mixed up.
One of the reasons why none of you guys know the name is one of the reasons why my talk show names, Summoning Insight, will live forever because they're fucking sick and no one has a name like it. And every single league show blurs into one because every single league show is called like Turret Dive, the Geek Squad. And so as a result, it's so insanely generic from the game. No one knows the name of these segments. Dude, half the time people don't even know, like, is post-game lobby the one on LCS, or is that like no one knows? They're all just such indiscriminate names.
The other problem is because they use game terms. When I'm trying to Google it right now, I literally can't find it. Yeah. Because, so basically what they've been doing is they've been getting representative casters from each of the 4 major regions, and then they debate like who is the best jungler or something like that.
It's a good premise.
And each of them puts up a candidate and like fights for them. And so what I love about this is,
and did they get someone from LCS?
Yeah.
Well, that's just cruel and unfair.
It's unfair.
That's actually just unfair to that person. Like, listen, give that guy a little bit of dignity.
So
fair. I think players come from other regions anyways.
I think what's funny about this is, like, first off, this content could have always existed, number one. But I also think it's becoming, with the part of the whole LoL esports rebrand, which I really like, I think they're trying to provide more highlights. And it's like what I was used to do with the countdown of MonteCristo with OGN, where I would go down the top 5 matches around the world each week so that you would know which games were like the most exciting or most hype. And I would explain the stories coming into them and the context of why I thought it was, strategically good or something like that. Now, I don't have time to watch all of those games, every game around the world like I used to, and make that show anymore. But I think it's really important that show exists, or that kind of show exists, because you have to be able as a fan to track narratives. And in these 10-minute segments, you can actually have people like champion their own personal picks, and you get excited about this player coming in, especially to the World Championship, that you might not have paid a lot of attention to. But it brings, I'd love to see more highlights. I'd love to see more of this kind of content. I'd love to see someone else do the kind of countdown show that I used to do, to kind of focus people's attention. So I really think like that is really crucial to the way that we look at League of Legends around the world going forward, because it was a more than full-time job for me to spend all my time watching all the major regions back when I was casting LCK, where I was also casting literally every single Korean game that was taking place and watching all the other regions as well, every game basically. So most fans are not going to be able to keep up with that. And so I think you need to have more curated content in order to push the really big narratives to drive excitement for Worlds and the major international tournaments among all fan bases.
No, here's one counter I would get. Oh, sorry, go on, Matt.
I was going to say, I think obviously that can do some of the service. I wanted to get back to what we were talking about, which is best of ones.
Yeah. Let's do it.
From my perspective, which is what I would love to share. I think like for Worlds and formatting, obviously that routes to the Worlds team. And my pathway to the Worlds team is presumably through the local LCS team. I think we're probably in that same category of, if the LCS is confident and feels good about the viewership and consistency of best of ones for the regular season, which is already trying to like compress a whole bunch of stuff into this like time period, I imagine it's going to be it's a pretty similar conversation, right? Like even if LCS goes to the Worlds team and says, hey, we're geared for best of 5, it's like a lot of them for our playoffs, can we like see a reimagining of the group stage for Worlds? They're going to say, not really. Like our viewership metrics say, like, because it's the lower tier teams, because of like the timing, because of what we're doing when we're doing it, best of 1 is what's going to make the most sense. So like, sorry, you can't build those competent teams. And then on top of that, that then comes back and says, okay, does that mean we should concede our playoffs into best of 1? I don't think we'd ever come to that conclusion. And because of that, I just don't think there's like a quick, easy fix, at least from my perspective, to like pathing and fixing that.
Because my problem is this, is again, if you're just using the group stage, which is essentially what you're doing, the round robin phase, the regular portion of an LCS split as like the qualifier, but since 8 out of 10 teams qualify, it's basically just don't be the worst. If people have ever seen the international, by the way, that's essentially what the international first portion is. Yes. Unless you're the absolute worst, you get to go on in the tournament. It just depends where you start off. So if you qualify, but you're the worst team to qualify, you will be in the lower bracket. So it's similar to, there's actually allusions to that in how they've actually constructed this playoff format, because it's not standard double elim as we're pointing out here. My point would be this though, that also then makes having the regular split the way it is a bit silly. Now, listen, if you actually know Riot Games history, they did design the regular portion of the split to be like, because the playoffs were like this as well, like the NFL. It was obvious they were fans of the NFL. You go week to week to week, and then you come to the playoffs. Someone skips to the divisional round. Someone plays the one that's qualified. You know, they had all this at the wildcard match. They had all the same stuff, right? The problem is this. At that point in time, the NFL doesn't do a great job of picking the hot teams at the end. It just does the whole split, and the first game's of equal importance to the last. They're equally the same in the standings. So my counter would be this. I get your premise, but in that scenario, it sounds to me like it would make more sense to just have whatever LCS is going to be compressed into a shorter frame of time, so you never get it. So that the team who's like, for example, FlyQuest started this split really well, but obviously nobody would want them to make the Worlds now because they're terrible. But if LCS had begun 4 weeks ago, that wouldn't be an issue, right? So I would say go that route maybe make the season short. You can have the same number of games, but maybe you play more play days on a week. Maybe it's just 3 or 4 weeks. And then the idea is, you know, we kind of don't have to put in weird mechanisms at that point in time.
Yeah, I think there's always considerations for like earth-shattering alterations, right? Where we like completely re-envision like what the LCS is and its presence. And I think there's space for it, but to more align with what you were saying on the NFL, I think that was effectively our old format. We took basically half our teams, only the teams that had a positive record effectively, and we just like ran them through a quick single elimination playoff, which I think made sense in the context that like the product itself was saying we're trying to find the best team in North America, which aligns with the NFL saying they're trying to find the best team in football. I think the things that are misaligned, like they just missed in the first case, and now that we've caught, is that I don't think Summer has ever actually served like solely that purpose, right? Like it has historically always been about kind of finding 2 World teams and then seeding championship points into the system, the second round, and then feeding into Gauntlet. All of that felt very like, it was just hard for fans to track, right? Like we were always kind of reassessing the math on the Gauntlet already, like the championship points. And then the event itself, just like I'll speak for the team side, has never felt great. Especially if you're a team that qualify, like misses playoffs but goes to Gauntlet, you're practicing for like 40 straight days before you even get to play a best of 5. And it historically, no team has been thrilled where they get eliminated from playoffs and it's like, well, at least we have the Gauntlet in 3 weeks. Like no one's thrilled about this, right? And I don't think we've ever seen the Gauntlet be like the epitome of like the highest level of North American. Like, yeah, it's not the highest level of North American play. So it being like our technically crowning event that happens like right before Worlds has always felt so weird. And I think like a lot of what we've done has accommodated that, unless so like we're trying to I would love it if we cared a lot about who wins the LCS, right? If it was like NFL scale, that's like the most important team on the planet, but NA hasn't even won Worlds yet, so I don't think we're going to be drawing that conclusion until like we take home a world championship or 2 at a minimum.
Well, I also think that, I think there's a couple flawed premises here. First off, you don't have to run the Gauntlet 3 weeks later. Let's start there. You could just run it immediately after playoffs ends. You could run it the next week, right? So it's less
historically it runs right after playoffs. I'm saying teams that get eliminated early in playoffs, they have points.
So you sit out playoffs.
Or you don't go to playoffs at all, so you watch the entirety of playoffs. And then you show up for 1 best of 5, you lose, and you go home.
Yeah, that's true.
It's the scheduling, basically. Yeah,
teams in general, it's just bad time management.
And second off, I think that the best of 1 format itself, as Thorin was implying, we don't have to have a best of 1 double round robin format. Like that's not some sort of requirement that's written in stone that we have to continue to use, right? I think there's a lot of ways to do more exciting formats that would have the best teams play each other more often, potentially, or have them have like higher stakes matches. I think we've seen like the Overwatch League switch from a league format into a tournament format so far due to the pandemic this season that has been really successful. And I think in general, like there's definitely a way. There are many ways that you could increase the value of those best of 1 games, even while still having best of 1s, in my opinion.
By the way, one thing I do want to throw out there while we're on the topic of formats is, even though I actually do think, like one thing I'll give props to Riot for is I actually think the LCS format for the playoffs is better than Europe's. Like Europe's, even though it has all these elements in it, like the seeding decides where you go in the lower bracket, I don't like that much. In my opinion, like the whole point of the first part was like, if you get the top seed in the playoffs, Why would you get an extra benefit? You got the top seed already, dude. You get in the upper bracket and you're the number one seed. So, but one thing I do like that they did is, again, if the whole point is select the best teams to go to Worlds, I love that they've made it so that the winner of Summer in Europe automatically qualifies. So even if Rogue shits the bed, they did win the regular portion, they get to go to Worlds.
I just don't like ever saying someone won regular season. Like nobody should win.
Yeah, because you're American, mate.
Yes,
you aren't
because
aware
you're
that, like, every single soccer fan in the world. You are, dude. I don't know if you guys know this. I'm just going to make a point.
We're arguing for the American League, right?
When we have leagues in Europe in soccer, I personally am not that big a fan of it because, as I say, it treats game one as the same as the end game at the end, right? But everyone else loves it, right? So as a result, in European soccer, the thing you want to win is the league. Now, we have cups as well, but put it this way, my favourite team as a boy was Liverpool, who actually only just won the Premier League for the first time ever now, because the Premier League only started in the 90s. But even so, they haven't won in like 30 years or something. But in the meantime, by the way, they won the European Champions League twice, which, by the way, is the equivalent on a club football level of winning Worlds. So here's what's mad for you guys. In soccer, winning essentially LCK is considered more valuable than winning Worlds. Like, that is a real thing in soccer. So we don't really get this in Europe as much, this angle, because to me, the fact that you won the regular split, like, yeah, you won something there. That was a league. You played the full round robin and you were number one. You shouldn't, that's just not only a seed from that. Like, listen, I don't want you to get benefits in the playoffs because I feel like that skews too much to the best of ones. But you did accomplish something because, remember, each format rewards a different thing. Yeah, like, Rogue essentially had just more consistency over a split to it.
If our esport was better compartmentalized, I would be super down for this. Like, I genuinely, this is like a weird concern I'm going to throw on the side, but obviously long-term scaling, historically, sports have selected kind of like a singular region that is like the one. It's like the focus, right?
I think this is exactly what LoL needs right now.
Yeah, and I'm of the opinion, like, I would not be shocked if 20 years from now we're staring at the LPL, right? Just being like the end-all be-all, and I need to shift my career, and I need to learn Mandarin, and I need to move across the planet because that's like the ultimate Premier League, and like it starts actually carrying more weight than Worlds because China wins, I don't know, like 7 in a row.
Yeah, it's like what LCK was. It's like what Champions was in Korea in 2014 and 2015. I mean, I can just tell you because I literally watched almost every game in the world of League of Legends in those years that Champions in 2014 was the highest concentration of talent that has ever existed in League of Legends because it was before the major exodus. And the level of competition wasn't even close. Like, the worst teams in Champions were capable of beating the best teams in other regions.
I think that was known too. It was pretty like consistently when the teams were talking about it, it was pretty obvious. Obviously, I don't think a broadcast wanted to like scream it from the top of a mountain or anything.
Well, it was the same year where, if you remember, SKT had already been eliminated from Champions when they went to what was like the precursor to MSI and just won the motherfucker. And they'd already lost in Champions, and I think maybe even the NLB match against like Frost at the time. So it actually just showed what Monty was saying. Like, they weren't even the best team, and then they just went and dominated on everyone. Like, they were no games
at that tournament, at that MSI. Or it was All Stars. It was called All Stars.
It was the same shit, basically.
I believe
they didn't lose a game.
They didn't lose a game, and I believe SKT was like the 8th best team in Korea at that time.
Yes, and that was the time, by the way, just to clarify how dominant they were. That was the tournament where, again, it was like MSI. It was all the best teams from all the regions. So the best team from Europe was Fnatic, right? If people don't remember, bad SK Telecom just picked their World Championship skins and still won the game. They still won the game.
Yeah. So to be clear, I think if a region finds that level of acclaim and they have a good regular season seeding format, like they have best of 3 or they have something that's more robust with a ton of best of 1s, I would absolutely be down not only for single elimination, but for focusing and recognizing only the higher seeded teams in the first place, right? We just don't have that confidence right now. And that's not even what we're playing for in the first place. So like when you make both of those concessions, it makes a lot of sense.
Here's a thought. I think this is a really interesting way to put it, because I actually was thinking about this very same thing, Danan, about like how you can concentrate talent. And to go back to what I was saying earlier, it's really hard when you have all of these leagues and so much of the talent and teams spread out all over the place for fans to really track what the best narratives are. Yeah. And I think a lot of like the really hardcore fans. So the kind of disconnect that I see with the product is if you're Riot and you're saying, well, we want fans to be fans of the game, right? And we know our fans watch a ton of they're not necessarily beholden to any particular team. They watch all these LCS and LEC games, and then they also watch some LPL and LCK. And a lot of the feedback I've gotten in the past couple of days from people and their viewing habits has been, well, I love watching all these highlights of all these games and then choose the games from all the regions that I like to watch. But what if we didn't have to do that? Because we don't have to do that in most other major sports. Sure, there are other leagues. There are regional leagues. There's the KBO, the Korean Baseball Organization in Korea. There's the Japanese leagues, right? There's the Central American leagues for baseball. But at the end of the day, it all feeds into the MLB. And I guess what's frustrating for me is like, I want the Premier League of League of Legends. Like, that's what I want to watch personally, right? And it's not that these regional leagues can't exist, but we already know that there's huge viewership for these American sports in Asia. And it's something that there's a lot that was problematic about the Overwatch League, but at least having one league made sure that you had all the best players competing against each other. And even if that league is dominated by, a variety of highly skilled Chinese and Korean players. One other thing that we critically learned about esports from the Overwatch League is that by having all the players in one league and one region was that we didn't see the skill disparities between players of different nationalities. Sure, there's still a ton of Korean players, but the MVP last year was an American player, for example, and there have been plenty of American players that have stepped up their game because they've been able to practice against these Korean players, and so you haven't had that same level of disparity between all of these different regions. And I think that's true. I still think, obviously, it'd be Asian player dominated, but probably over 50%, right? But I do think that there would be players that would level up their skill and would be able to hang on and would become stars, for the West, and would actually have a decent shot at winning,
you definitely would.
The world championship.
I mean, the obvious analog is basically every other esport except League of Legends, because League of Legends is the only one that totally segregates people. It means makes they can only compete at MSI. Yeah. I'm ignoring Big France
for consistent amount of time.
Yeah, if you go in CS:GO, for example, I can tell you this happens. Like, the more that regions come into contact, it's not that, like, here's the naive thing people would think. They would think it's like when we send all the NA teams to Worlds and they bootcamp the Koreans, and after 2 weeks, the joke is the Koreans just figured out how to smash the NA teams, and the NA teams barely leveled up. So it's like, it's almost unfair to them. But actually, I've always said this, if we'd have had like a CS:GO type circuit, which we basically did in like season 2, but it just wasn't, we didn't fully have the Asian teams attending every event. If we had like a CS:GO type circuit, I realize this might sound like heresy to some people, but like, for example, those like really great TSM teams from like 5 years ago, one of them would probably have like a random tournament where they just won. They'd probably just have one day where it just all came together. Remember, think about when teams like that go to Worlds and they fail. They always look way worse. And we're not just talking because of the level of competition, like the pressure, all this. That's the sort of thing that you can acclimatize to when you have a lot of competition and you play a lot. So it's the same thing used to happen. Like, basically in CS:GO, one of the opinions I used to have that used to shock a lot of CS:GO fans is I said, you guys are just lucky that Koreans and Chinese people don't give a fuck about our game. Because if they did, I've seen the other games, like, they would take over. It's just like, China has the scale. They have just the sheer number of people that would play the game, and enough would be good. And Korea has like the insane drive and
infrastructure.
They have everything.
Insane infrastructure.
But the point I always made is this. But don't worry, it wouldn't be like League of Legends. It's not like then Korea would win everything in CS:GO, and then, like, the best Swedish team would be 9th. They'd still be. What happened is it'd be like in games like Dota or CS:GO. Like, you can have regions that aren't as good, but the best team can still be competitive, or the second best team can have a chance. So it would work itself out. I guarantee.
We saw this very specifically in Overwatch because we had a regionalized system that, but prior to the start of the Overwatch League, Koreans were incredibly dominant, and over the last few years, the primary teams that have been winning have been mixed roster teams of Korean and Western players playing together. And it's now comms are much easier in Overwatch. There's a lot of stuff that's different. But my point is that we've seen major steps up in terms of the parity of skill across regions. And frankly, like, as somebody who really likes League of Legends, I just want to sit down and say, this is the league that we talk about. And sure, it's fun to talk about the regional leagues and who is the hottest rookie from Korea, and are they going to get into this league over the hottest rookie from Europe, right? And I think that especially Europe and China and Korea have been building those grassroots approaches to develop esports players. And in fact, right before we started this show, the LCS commissioner put out a tweet saying they were hiring somebody to build esports infrastructure from a high school into academy level and sort of take ownership over that entire developmental portion because they want to make better esports players. Now, is that possible?
Here's the one question I would have. So what you're going to do is you're going to create a path to pro from high school to academy, yet you haven't successfully made a path to pro from academy to LCS.
I think maybe that will be part of this person's job too, because obviously that hasn't.
After that, just have them make nuclear fission, fucking cold fission, maybe make them make a perpetual motion machine, maybe make Riot consistent. Just give them all the impossible tasks.
I want to challenge this a little bit and say I actually think Riot has done a better job overall of actually building that pathway from academy to LCS. I think teams haven't been utilizing it.
I agree.
I think we're a team that has been leaning on it, but I think there's been a ton of teams where they clearly haven't like changed their mentality since relegation, and they've just completely faltered in their decision making, either just outright not electing to make the decisions or just making a lot of.
Wait a second. You have to qualify that statement, right? So you're in Golden Guardians, yeah?
Yeah.
Which one of your players is an academy player that you developed?
What do you mean? We literally brought Victor over and played him in academy.
Who's Victor?
FBI, sorry.
Right, so FBI, a player from a different region, is your academy explanation for development.
I mean, I think there's a handful of different things. We also have been giving
let's
a lot
be
of
real, by the way.
time to our academy players, and I think other teams don't. This might be insight I have that's like hard to explain.
I'm just going to say, you have one
teams,
player, and he already was a talent in Australia. And secondly, he didn't get in because he was really awesome in academy. He got in because Deathly was really bad.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I mean, I would also advocate for Golden Glue. I'd advocate for Devontae. These are academy
Wait a minute,
players
your
that
team
have been utilized in LCS.
I'll just put it to you know what? The fans can be the jury on this one. Would you like to believe, Danan here, that Golden Guardians, by the way, didn't exist until 2018. Mm-hmm. They developed a player called Golden Glue who was already in LCS in like Dignitas like 5 years ago. They developed him on their academy team. I'll just put it to you, the fans. Do you think they developed him, or had he already been in academy a billion times?
I'm not advocating specifically that our academy team is
what you advocating?
I don't think that's fair to say only our academy team is the path to pro. I'm saying academy serves its purpose, right? It's like actually being able to be utilized that way. I think other teams just aren't capable.
We have to talk about a point here, mate. We can't all just make separate points, right? So your point was that Riot did a good job in designing academy so that it could produce pro LCS players, and that your team was an example of it because the other teams don't. I asked you for an example. Your example fell apart under question.
I advocated that we used academy. I didn't say we specifically, our academy players are the ones that we found the success with, right?
Okay, so this is a genuine good faith question. How would you suggest other teams do whatever method you envision your team did? How would you suggest they do it to like develop the talent that comes forwards? Like, you can be very abstract if you want.
I can summarize that very easily. Just pay attention to other teams' academy teams. Like we do that. Like we're aware. Our academy.
Oh, you mean as in watch theirs because they've got good players or something?
Yeah, because like again, those players aren't like magically inaccessible. I think there's this weird stigma around like they're an academy player, but because they're contracted, you can't get to them. Like I don't think that's the case. Like Tactical literally was on TSM prior. Obviously, many of our players have historically come from academy teams. C9 is obviously the best example of a team where like internally they used a lot of their academy players.
Yes, sure.
But I think there's a lot of space for teams like Dignitas, teams like CLG, teams like Immortals to be looking at other teams' academy players. Immortals actually is one of the teams I think has done a good job. They like set a bad foundation, but they pivoted late around Insanity and around Alarim. And obviously we got to see two players that are probably LCS caliber that otherwise we wouldn't have. And I think that's the example, right? Immortals could have done that a lifetime ago. They could have done that literally years ago, and they elected not to. Ultimately, obviously, they let go of their GM and they let go of their coach because of it. But now that there's new blood coming in, which is what should happen when a team struggles like that, they leverage the academy space. Bam, they started finding their footing. I think, again, they just had a bad foundation, so like they couldn't actually manage to get like the one game they needed at the end of the split to make playoffs. But ultimately, it's a good example that the pathway is there. Teams just don't use it enough.
Well, we've also talked to players and over the last few episodes, and they don't even send the players to like boot camp. I mean, what's so silly to me is that when you have these these academy teams that only play 6 months out of the year, why are you not sending them to Korea to boot camp or Europe to boot camp for the other months? That's the real development.
This, by the way.
Yeah, well, great. I mean, but I think
we have a boot camp program every offseason for our academy players.
Yeah, I think that's like a pretty major factor that many teams are not undergoing. Like when we speak to people like Alorum, and he's saying like, I've never been to Korea. My question is, why? Right? Why have you not traveled outside to get better access? But I think this goes back to when we're looking. I want to return the conversation to like the idea of the big league. Because for me, that's what really drives like insane viewership. And yeah, some of these matches probably have to happen in, a Chinese time zone, because a Chinese favorable time zone, because that is such an enormous part of the viewership market in League of Legends. But I just don't see it as feasible if you really want to blow this League of Legends up as much as possible across all these regions,
to be so global.
Yeah, that to be so fractured. I mean, you can be global. I think if anything, being global is one of the really cool aspects of esports as a whole, is that we can have, these hugely global competitions with people from around the world who play the games. But I don't want all the talent to be just fractured into all of these different leagues and all of these different teams, when we could have the League of Legends Super League that is the Ultra Pro League, and have it be totally awesome.
Let me ask
basically Champions League.
Yeah, let me ask a question then. Are you advocating, like, because I'm not advocating, I think eventually someone will win, right? Like LPL. But are you advocating that like the LCS should try to do that, like make their own decisions that are more in scope for what they're doing, and try to like build something that's better than Worlds, like, or at least more prestigious? No. Or are you advocating that Worlds should be reassessed as a product, and we should be looking to turn Worlds into
Monty? Listen. If you've watched this show long enough, you know that secretly Monty just wants LCK to be like Season 2 OGN champions and the best Western teams to come to LCK, play in LCK. In this case, just like WWE, you can have a Chinese come and forget all the rest of League of Legends. Let's just watch Korea. The one league with the best teams.
I can't disagree with this. I like Korea.
No, but seriously, my argument is that. So basically, I would turn Worlds into a tier 2 event where you would have the regional leagues as feeder leagues to the League of Legends Champions League, let's say. And then I would have Worlds be a competition between all of the winners of all the regionals, so that you can scout new players for the big Champions League. Are you having fun there, moving your camera?
I'll get there.
And so that would be my goal, is like, that's the major international competition, because I think that's super hype for fans of the amateur system, or a way that you can watch one amateur tournament and be really excited about future prospects and players that might be signed, or be like, wow, the Korean feeder league is super powerful still, or the Chinese one is the best, so let's see how the Western teams compete against it. But at the end of the day, the top level, I would much rather have the top level league be like 20 teams, and have all those 20 teams be like the end all be all of the professional scene. And we know that's where the highest level of competition takes place. Yeah.
Like basically the 20 of the 24 Worlds teams, like quality, equivalency wise.
Yes. Yeah, and I don't have a good way to do this, because now we've sold all these franchises.
I'm asking for on-ramps. Give me pathways. First and foremost, like the biggest challenge for that is going to be the import restrictions on regions, right? I think what you're talking about,
you get rid of
that. You're trying to idealize that pathway. That's just really, really complicated and crazy, and especially brings in players, because of the amount of players who have like aggressively invested very deeply in their region, whether they're domestic themselves, or especially the imports who have pursued.
I mean, they can still play in the feeder leagues.
No, but he just means it like fucks over. Like an obvious example would be where like Phoenix famously was about 1 day away from getting like the residence status, and that would have obviously, like, let's be real, he'd obviously stayed in America to get the residence status so that he could then have a kind of a secure career for a couple of years, right? And that was kind of what he put his life into. So it's kind of like a tangential point he's making here, I think.
especially for players who make the jump, they've been like committing a lot of resources, time, energy, and then you just overnight are like, by the way, it doesn't, none of this is relevant, or it doesn't matter. You probably should go play for a Korean team because they're going to be like the best foundation for these like 20 teams, right?
I mean, to be fair, the same.
Right, I'm just saying there's a lot of complicated things that you have to
I don't
work
think that's
through,
true.
But I'm curious to thought play on this and see how you get there.
To be fair, the Immortals lineup put in a lot of effort to try and be really good for Season 8, but then they just got deleted from League of Legends. So there was that one, wasn't there? So, Riot, it's not like there's no precedent for that. Just saying.
I also think that it wouldn't matter so much because a player that would invest time in that region who might not be as good, the whole purpose of having this one league would be that they would have more of a chance to play against the best competition to re-hone their skills, and so they could still theoretically get back there. But Danan, I don't really have a lot of sympathy for that player if they can't do that, because the idea of this system is I want to watch the top 20 teams and the 100 best players in the world play, and if that player is incapable of being one of them, I'll be real with you, Danan. I don't give a fuck.
I'm going to sound cold. I'm not looking for sympathy for them. I'm saying the political game of getting there is the challenge, because like I agree.
It's going to be bad PR.
I'm just saying you have to go through the PA. You have to go through the players in the PA, and that player's going to have sympathy, not from us, but presumably from the other players.
Here's the example, Monty. Imagine then Hooney just the first thing when this is announced, he just posts like a sad emoji on like Twitter. Now all of his fans are going to be raging like, right, he's taken away Hooney's got like that's what he's bringing up here. Yeah. Then again, it's not like Riot really usually thinks of whether there's going to be bad PR before doing anything. What was the end result on that one? I don't know how that one worked out, did it? Don't say anything. Don't get fired. Don't get fired. Don't get fired.
Screaming politics in my head.
I think though, when you look at that too, it's not like these players couldn't play in the regional leagues, right? And because they do have a lot of fans and because they do bring a level of veteranship and quality, they still have value in the same way that many players still have value if they go down to academy to train new players if they're veterans on how to have professional comms or what to talk about within these games. So I don't, and also I think that under the Super League format that many of the regional leagues would still be, obviously they wouldn't be as popular as LCS, but it's not like the LCS regional league would be dead. Like people would still, it's not like, for example, that no one in Korea watches baseball because the MLB exists. They still want to go out and see games in their time zone and be interactive with their player base. But they also watch MLB, especially if they're Korean players playing. And I think that we would have to assume that these games would be played in a China favorable time zone, which is very bad for America. And so if you still had primetime games with the level of production that you have on LCS, people would still watch it because they're fans of North American teams. And then they could also watch, the good matches from the top league as well.
I see the logic behind like piling these resources that we have tons of regions that we can pull pieces apart from and build a super league while not completely dismantling the localities or anything. But I do think, again, that's a pretty massive undertaking. That would be a conversation I would think would have to start now if you wanted to maybe do it in 10 years, right?
Yeah, look, I'm not saying that this is easy or that it's possible. I'm just trying to theory craft where the game can go as a format, because as we're discussing how these playoff changes have happened and the world's changes we'd like to see, it's like if we're going to do that, we might as well go as big as possible and just say, please just give me a group of the best teams, because I just miss that. I miss that from being in Korea in 2014 and being able to cast that and watch it. It was awesome. It was hands down the best esports experience I had in a year in 2014.
And you call the tournament the new elite overall Masters League, the Neon League, for sure.
And we know where it would be headquartered, so But yeah, I just want to see that is the end of it, and I think that it would be very progressive as well, because we are moving towards more viewership around the world for many sports. And I think that globalizing those teams and having this interregional competition and having the ability for all of these nations to compete against each other is just the future.
I'll give you a reason as well that would actually be pretty cool, which is if you had a proper league. So obviously the problem with Worlds is you don't actually play that many matches at Worlds, and it's drawn out over like, a long period of time, but you don't play many matches. In this Super League, presumably it was like kind of like an LCS split, but just like one at the end of the year with all the best teams. The logic would be hopefully all the regions would tune in. So imagine the like media attention you get on that. Like the broadcast rights could be crazy. You could get some really serious like money invested in something like that.
I mean, this starts
much like the Premier League, it's a Champions League rather in Europe.
Yeah, this starts looking like a World Cup-esque event, right?
Or Olympics level. I mean,
I was gonna say minor Olympics level if you play it right.
Yeah, I really think that if you're looking at sales and sponsorships and you're looking at globalized companies that could invest in this kind of structure and selling media rights across all of these different languages that we're interested, I think this is it's the big money play. But I don't know how you undo, like you're saying, how you undo the franchising, how you undo all of these other structures that they put in place, because Riot was so committed to the regionalization. And it's hard to fault them for that in some ways, because I feel like the grassroots leagues have been very successful in developing regions, especially if we look at Brazil or Turkey.
LMS, all those.
We also have to.
There's exceptions.
Sure. We always have to look at it through the lens of the fact that like a lot of the original initiatives were marketing, right? And I don't think anyone at when they originally were like trying to like understand what they were doing here was like, think of the massive multi-billion-dollar marketing investment we could put in to make this like crazy. Yeah, there's no way to like preempt this, right? So I think now it's one of those like, okay, you have to wrap that conversation into all of your local leagues and then carry that to the global team. And then again, the global team wouldn't even foot the bill on this, right? This would be, now you go to Tencent and you say, we need to go big, but it's going to pay off. It's going to be one of the greatest marketing endeavors in the history of marketing, honestly. While simultaneously doing like better serving our esports communities.
And creating a consistent, I think it does so much for the longevity of the game too, because the level of hype, I mean, obviously I'm super invested in League of Legends, but it makes me more excited to watch League of Legends just thinking about it. So that's, that's a pretty big sell. And like, I'm tired of waiting for Worlds every year and this best of one format in order to watch the competition between the top teams. Like I can't do that for another 10 years, Danan. Like I can't.
This year is a good test for kind of what you're stating, which is kind of this like fatigue, right? Like effectively international fatigue, but like a lack of international. I'm curious to see if we see any impact on Worlds. Again, everything will have an asterisk, as you guys have already said, not like the outcome of the event I'm saying, but the actual like viewership numbers as everything comes through. But I'm curious if not having an event in the middle of the year is just going to like massively inflate Worlds, or if we're going to have seen such like a fatigue that you're talking about where the numbers struggle to hit their goals because we weren't able to give them something in the middle of the year.
One thing I wonder, actually, I've never looked into this. Maybe someone out there, because the numbers will exist. You could go and check this. I'd love to know what the viewership for Worlds is compared to if you combine all the viewership for the regions, like whether or not you get a disproportionate amount of people who only watch Worlds. Because I can tell you, in CSGO, now to be fair, in CSGO, the majors, which are our equivalent of Worlds, were the only tournament back in the day that was in the client. We never had any, we don't have like LCS like now. Like if I loaded up League of Legends yet last night, I would have had like, Team Liquid's playing TSM or whatever in my client saying to go watch it. But the majors in CSGO, even to this day, as far as I know, have like disproportionately way higher viewership. So even though the same teams are all playing in the tournaments in CSGO, it's not like even the quality's different. You're not saying, you're going down to lesser. The same teams that play in the major final, playing any random tournament in June or whatever. The viewership, it goes something crazy, like a 5x for a major. Which suggests to me that there is a big audience of people who don't really follow the game, but they think of it, as you're saying, like a World Cup or Olympics, and they go, right, I've got to get in on this.
I think the difference, though, with CS is that anyone can watch it, and it's the great crossover esport that everyone from every other esport will watch a major because it's so intuitive and you can understand it. I don't think that's true of games that have 100 different characters in them that you have to learn all the nuance of. I think games like Dota and League are floated by their massive player bases, and it's when I, in the past, when I wasn't engaged in CS and I wasn't watching as much CS, I would watch those events, but I felt like I could understand it and be hyped about it because the game is so viewer accessible no matter where you're from, right? If you've ever played any FPS, you can watch CS just fine.
Yeah. I'm really curious what you're talking about here. When it comes to like merging the regions, their viewership, I know Riot has historically really, really advocated for the minor regions, right? They've always pushed really hard on giving them a pathway, especially to Worlds. They went so far as completely overhauling the play-in stages and like re-envisioning that entire process. I'm curious to see if there's like a significant increase in viewership from those minor regions over their like local viewership. If like the OS League only sees like 5,000 viewers concurrently, consistently, but when Worlds comes around, we're getting hits of like 15,000 OS viewership, right? Like I'm curious.
I'm sure they will, and I think it depends too on if any of the Oceanic players actually attend Worlds. Like I think if your team goes to Worlds, then you would see an uptick, right?
Well, by the way, they always send one, right? Like for the minor regions, they like effectively mandate them at that play-in stage. I'm curious to see if like those teams, since they always go, if like magically they get like 3 times viewership just because they attend Worlds.
I'm sure
that'd be really cool.
I'm sure they do.
There's one thing, by the way, that I do get a little bit sick of, which is when TOs, tournament organizers, in case people aren't familiar with the terminology in League of Legends, is when TOs just make pronouncements and they have all the data in the world and they don't give us any of the actual. So, for example, when this guy, the LEC commissioner guy or whatever, was saying like, the viewership, it's like, no, don't just tell me viewership, dude. Show me an example. Show me like Fnatic versus G2 back when it was best of threes and show me Fnatic versus G2 now. Because that's such a wide, all-encompassing statement. Because this used to happen, Monty, in StarCraft 2, and it used to drive me mad. So we had all these people when they made WCS, so that you had to be region locked, kind of like LCS. They said famously, well, nobody wanted to watch just Koreans play each other in like the final of an event. And I was like, well, you know what, DreamHack? Rather than just saying that, since you have all the viewership stats, show me that. Show me that. Like look, when it was Korean versus Korean, it was a tenth of the viewership. But when Nanawa made one, it was twice. They never did, by the way, which I'll go ahead and say this right now. When someone has all the stats and they won't give you any, suggests to me there's a reason they won't give you the data. It's the reason why the US government in 2020 can't tell you who actually killed John F. Kennedy or any of the details about that. Even though in theory shouldn't be controversial at this point in time, should it? Just release the files, pilot. That was a Bill Hicks comment.
I think also that when you compare viewership, you're going to be comparing it in the non-best of one era to when, first off, LEC hadn't made 2 back-to-back world finals and people were much more excited about the skill in the European region. So that's a contributing factor to viewership. You were doing it before you had the big rebrand in the LEC and the kind of show format, which I think is really attractive to many people, including myself right now, that makes me watch more LEC because I like the way the broadcast and the content is operated. So you can't just say that it's just the format that was affecting viewership, right? And I think it's difficult to go around that and then draw conclusions about what happened years ago when you were operating a different format, because everything about the skill level and the presentation of your league has changed in the interim. Everything.
Yeah.
So
no, I completely agree. Again, when they tell me like they have the stats and like it's understood internally across the board, there's like this unanimous perspective. I'm in a position where I need to trust it. Like we're working together to build an amazing league, and that's the idea, is like you're trusting your leadership. But again, I'm always going to be sitting there questioning, saying, is there any pathway? Is there something we can do to accommodate best of 3? Is there literally any angle you can provide me? Can you tell me a stat that like I can go manifest through some initiative that if I hit that number in, I don't know, Academy, if we just like sack Academy for a couple weeks and I hit a number, you're like, okay, then we'll try it for LCS. Like,
I'll give you an example.
Give me an olive branch.
This is exactly what you're talking about. So one of the famous things in Counter-Strike, at least an anecdote that I've told many times, is because in the old days of the previous version of Counter-Strike, CS 1.6, obviously we didn't have this massive esports media that we have now. We didn't even have streaming platforms. You used to watch it through like a client that was kind of like a small clone of the game called HLTV, basically. So when you would watch the game like that, there was a famous stat that HLTV, the website, actually said, to show how many casual fans watched the game and didn't know esports, which is they said that when we used to have a best of 3 playoff game in CS, that more like half the audience would leave after map 1 no matter what, because they thought it was a best of 1, even though it would be like a best of 3. So everyone else was like, where are they going? Like, it's just map 1. So that would be an example of what you're talking about, Danan. If you could go and fight, say they said people only want to watch best of 1s, that would be the kind of area you'd start looking for. Right, well, do they tune out after game 1? Or if I can get them to as many to watch game 2 as I watch game 1, basically what we're trying to say is, because this is by the way a theory, something that goes in line with what I was talking about with Monty in the preview, which is when something's happened, you can make up any old reason you want as to why, but if you want to actually show that you understand like a deep principle, you need to have predictive power. So if he could go to them and say, right, well, if I can show you that the matches on game 2 in the series have as much or even more viewership, how about that? Maybe that's an angle to sell it on. Then can we come back and talk about this? Because at that point in time, Riot can't just make a bland glib statement that like, oh, viewership just isn't as interesting. You'd have an in on that then.
I think if there's something I actually can point to, I wasn't sure how to talk about it. I think they put a lot of confidence in their survey team. I think they really feel like their survey team has a pretty.
Who did they survey?
Connect.
You know, how does that work?
I'm pretty sure it's players. I'm pretty sure this is like their in-game.
They just send out a thing in the game, and do you want to fill in a survey?
After a game, sometimes you'll just randomly get a question, right?
And do you get RP or something if you fill it out?
I think there's there used to be some incentive program. I don't know if there is now. I think sometimes you'll get emails too. Like, I think that it's pretty comprehensive. They try to hit you on a lot of different angles.
I'm just waiting for the data tune in, and it's like,
I think they have a lot of confidence in this team.
Which is the best caster in league, Monty or Jat? And then if you pick like Monty, like it's all grayed out. I can't click it, and then eventually it just bans you. If you get chat restricted if you do it 5 times, 10 times, you just banned from the game.
But I could see a reality where they look at their numbers, they look at the old best of 3, they look at current best of 1, and then they compare it to the survey system, which probably says something along the lines of like, how long do you like to watch League of Legends? And they say like an hour. And at that point, immediately it goes, okay, you cannot fit 2 games in an hour. It's just not possible.
But here's the thing, you're self-selecting people who have watched a ton of LCS who are like, how long do I watch it? I guess an hour, and it's not like because my team was playing or whatever, and that's good, or that's how long I think a match should take. I think it's really, when you've already set people's viewing habits, that's just how their brain is going to think about it, right? They're not necessarily going to be saying, oh, well, I would watch more if these 2 teams were playing that were really good.
Also,
I would super enjoy that.
Can we get something? I know this word's going to seem alien to you guys in the 21st century. It's called hard data. Hard data. You know what? Lord save me from self-reported things in this world, because that is like the #1 root cause, without going deep on this, of almost every problem in the world. Is like, you should see how many studies and things you go to the bottom of, and it was like a self-reported survey. Like, people just said they felt that way. It's like, oh, well, I'll just believe them then. People never lie, right? Fucking hell. And over the internet, definitely not. So, like, I get the premise, but that's why I say your approach is better. I think, dude, if you actually go out there and you get the data and you could say, right, well, what would I have to show you? Or essentially, yeah, what would change your mind? What area could I start to look in? What would be at least like a sign point, a signpost that we can go this different route? I think you've got an angle there. That's a better approach, I think.
But no, I will say, to be clear, I imagine, and I can't state unequivocally that it's true, that there's obviously multiple layers to this. The league leadership has their goals that they just want to do because they feel that way. The survey team asks not just the simple question of how long do you watch, they probably ask a handful of different questions at a minimum. And then they also compare that to the hard data of what they've actually seen historically and currently. And they match all of that together, and they come back and say, we could give you a 7 slide presentation on all of the reasons you're wrong. But for us, pretty unequivocally, best of 1 makes sense. I mean, we're not even talking about like the scheduling considerations. I know Overwatch League obviously had a really unique perspective on how to like guarantee matches starting at a certain time. Obviously, Korea just goes, 50 minutes of downtime, it happens between matches. I think the LCS presumably so far has shown that they don't want to do that, right? They want to be able to consistently put out matches at a time that people are aware, and they want to be able to do appointment viewing. So I think between all those things, I think we've hit the point where when Riot says, okay, best of 1 is just necessary with the current skew of the year, the amount of time that we have, at that point I start saying, okay, can we do more? I think that's where I've been lately, saying, when we do this like 3rd day, can it be a full day? Can we do a 4th day? Can we like beef up the broadcast team? Can we just do more around that best of 1 to make it feel better, so that we don't have to concede as much for playoffs, which is, I think, is what we've been talking about a lot today, right?
Yep. And I think we do need to actually talk about the playoffs at some point in time, briefly, especially because Crownshot is
They only start in like 2 days.
Yeah, they only start in 2 days. So I agree. And you actually did, I think, make a very compelling argument for the playoff format that we have. But it also,
Can we say something about that, though, Monty?
What?
Right. Again, we have this massive 9 week, is it 9 weeks or 10 weeks or something of LCS? Weeks. And then playoffs right there in 3 days. What? Like, what? I don't even have time to prepare. Dude, the first match in the playoffs is supposed to be epic. Like, I want those teams to have time to practice.
It's also that the fact that it's hard to turn around content to hype up the playoffs that fast too if you're making it, right?
I will say, historically, I don't know if there's actually been as much of a challenge. There usually has been like a week where we had the downtime, playing around with Gauntlet, moving stuff around. If I'm being honest, I think there's some pressure around like Worlds and getting it like specifically lined up in timing for like the quarantine and everything, which accelerated stuff. I don't think you'll see like this specific summer schedule moving forward. That would be my guess.
Let's talk about your team, because we discussed this with Damonte last week. You guys start the split 1-5. You go 8-4 after that to kind of close everything out, and you're going to be playing up against another team that has had a improving performance, I would say, over the course of the summer split in TSM, and that is in fact the very first game of the playoffs that you mentioned, which is going to be
Thursday
on Thursday. So not a lot of time to turn this around.
New patch too, by the way.
Yes, and on a new patch, which has some it changes a lot
biggest
of champions.
Patch pretty much since preseason almost.
Yes. A lot of the changes are more minor, I would say, but it touches...
There's just a lot of them.
It's a lot of changes, but many of them are more subtle or more tweaks rather than being wholesale meta changes. But again, nobody's going to know how this works out. So now
no pressure, but if you win this one match, you probably stop TSM from going to Worlds. So all I'm going to say is if you want to accomplish anything in your life, you're a Golden Guardians player, do this one thing for me.
TSM has had a great winners bracket run in double elim events, have they? I feel like I've seen them
played
drop.
in one.
It would obviously been prior to LCS.
I mean, back in the day, they used to play in NA anyway, pretty much. So I don't really know if that even matters.
So long, it's hard to tell.
So when you're heading into,
they did used to lose like the upper bracket match to CLG or whatever back in the day. I think I remember what you're referencing there. Yeah.
So where do you guys feel like you're at right now when it comes to this matchup in particular and how your performances is going to go? Because we saw Liquid take out TSM this past week. That was their major opponent that they had to defeat in order to have a chance to become get the bye, be the number 2 seed, potentially vie with Cloud9. They failed to do that in a match that didn't matter at all to Team Liquid.
Yeah.
And you guys are coming in with a stronger record, and it looks like you're getting better at integrating Damonte and activating Closer, which have been two of your big hurdles, I would say, in the summer split compared to the spring split. So you guys are on the up and up, generally speaking, and on the other side, you have TSM, who Bjergsen is having potentially an MVP candidate split so far, has been looking extremely strong. How do you think you stack up in this match where there's a lot because both of you are playing on this new patch and both of you have very, the most limited practice time?
I feel pretty good. I think I got a quick question. Did you guys catch our most recent match against them? It was like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. Okay, so realistically, I was already joking during that match that I felt like we actually beat TSM. It actually felt pretty good to like beat TSM in the capacity that we knew they were a team that was like starting to put things together and feeling better about themselves. And we unequivocally won like the early game and we're in like a really good position macro wise. I just like to say we lost to Bjergsen, which happens, right? Like he arguably is an MVP candidate. I could definitely see him topping Core JJ for it. And I'm not going to feel terrible whenever we put ourselves in a position where he's going to have a lot of power. He's going to have a lot of agency in the game, right? We open ourselves to allowing him to play LeBlanc. They're going to have a Yuumi that can ride on top of him. I think that's understandable that we would end up losing the game the way that we did. But ultimately, I still felt good about the matchup. And I think going into playoffs, we feel even better because now we'll be more equipped and more prepared for this version of Bjergsen versus the version of Bjergsen we've been facing for the last 2 years.
Yeah, and I think that in that game in particular that you played this last weekend, the early game, you were looking quite good, and it was only when the Yuumi started to be on top of the LeBlanc in the mid and late game that Bjergsen really opened everything up. But it
abandoning double lift.
Yeah, a double lift was abandoned definitely in that game. So still though, it was a long game, was almost 39 minutes long. So you guys came out feeling relatively okay about how that match went and your odds in a best of 5.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like for us, like you can look at it, and I think a lot of teams would agree that being able to crack the case that is, dealing with like their new mid jungle and especially like their new bot lane doesn't appear to have a ton of consistency yet. I think if we are able to like break their formula, the thing they've been doing pretty consistently, like they haven't been like a crazy team where they do some like weird thing here and weird thing here and weird thing here, right? Outside of like there's occasionally a zillion in the game. They're one of the more standard teams in North America, similar to Liquid. I think realistically it's simply a matter of being smarter, and I think that's something we have an absolute opportunity to do, especially with our coaching staff.
Thorin, you had a really interesting tweet about Broken Blade that I thought was an interesting take. What was your thought on that, if you want to expand on it?
Like, here's the thing. When people were flaming him earlier in the split, I think that was just the standard TSM fare where, like, they look at all the players on the team and they go, right, I can't flame Bjergsen because it's Bjergsen. Double Lift, I've always wanted him back. Biofrost, Bio Daddy, like, shit memes. And then they go, Spicker, he's brand new. Right, Broken Blade. You know, the way they have, like, a process of elimination, they just pick one person they hate on. So the split before that was Kobe for obvious reasons. So I thought they were being very unfair to him earlier in the split because he was basically the carry of the spring. Like, and last year it was straight dynamite most of the time. But the problem I've had this split is he now plays on a team with Bjergsen and Double Lift, and you can go ask your boy Hunter about that. That ain't easy because when you play on a team with Double Lift and Bjergsen, you are going to be the weak side player a lot of the time. You are not going to be the Broken Blade who played those other 3 splits where you can be the carry, because when you give Broken Blade his carry champions and a little bit of jungle attention, one of the best players in the top lane. My problem is this. I've been saying this the last couple of years. I'll do a piece of content on it. I think that in the modern day, when you rank top laners, you have to take into account all styles of top lane, because top laners, just like junglers, eventually will be asked to play those other styles. In the same way as you cannot only be a carry jungler and play all year, every year in League of Legends, because you won't be in a top team. You will just, when it goes to the Cinderhall type meta, you'll be fucked. So in the same sense, my problem with Broken Blade is, first of all, Gangplank's obviously a classic champion that you're supposed to be good at if you're going to be the weak side. He is garbage at the champion. I'm talking about it is noticeably bad.
It wasn't great at the TL game for sure.
And then beyond that, like, what can he really play weak side except Ornn? Which, by the way, spoiler, that basically is like, oh, you can't play anything weak side, take Ornn. Like, that's like, everyone can play Ornn. That's like saying when I swim, I don't instantly drown. Yeah, it's called buoyancy. Like, I will drown eventually, though. Like, so in that scenario, like, I just feel as though people overrated him because basically he had one type of team for 3 splits. And now this split, when he's got, in theory, now the good teammates. Now is when everyone's supposed to be starting to get good. Like, the only player I basically give, like, a pass to sort of is a bit Bjergsen because I don't think he has a jungler. But everyone else in that team should be, you know, you've got a pretty good squad now. For this to be like when you're looking your worst, that's alarming to me. Like, that makes me concerned because Broken Blade was supposed to be one of the absolute top tier top laners. And in fact, we can talk about this matchup now. Going into this matchup, there should only be, on paper, one advantage for Golden Guardians. Jungle difference by far.
Yes,
but that shouldn't even necessarily be the end of the world when you consider they should, on paper, TSM, have solo lane advantage. But that's the point I'm trying to make with that tweet. I actually think Haunter absolutely can match up against Broken Blade. And I tell you what, Haunter, he was the guy who played weak side for Bjergsen and Double Lift. So he can play all styles of top lane as far as I'm concerned. I actually consider him a better top lane. So I think actually the advantages for GGS can be top and jungle. Bjergsen, if he really smurfs, can obviously do a lot. But actually the bot lanes, that's kind of a wash to me. I would say the better bot lane is TSM's, but they all just have impact in the team fight anyway. And actually, FBI's been pretty good in the team fight. So I think this is a much closer series than on paper it looks. Because when you see the names, Golden Guardians and TSM, your brain already thinks, obviously, there's no way TSM can lose that. They can lose games in this series for sure. I would almost guarantee they'll lose games.
I think you also have to look at treats and say, too, that
bot lane wins pretty consistently. I would just wanted to comment. I'm pretty sure on paper, our bot lane wins way more consistently.
I just don't think
you mean?
Yeah.
I just don't think it's a titanic difference in terms of the bot lane. I also think that as we look at treats, this is going to be his first LCS playoff, so you have to consider that he might have some level of stress or pressure on him as well in a scenario where he is expected to perform at a level that he has not previously. At least I would say with all your players, they've had kind of big game experience prior to this.
I've got 4 players that have been to Worlds, and the one that isn't is FBI, who went to MSI. So I'm not super stressed on that front.
Yeah,
that's why the closer angle to me is the interesting angle, because the interesting detail is, first of all, this split doesn't look great in LCS by the fact that 2 of the top 3 teams were TSM and Team Liquid, and their junglers seem like they don't even interact on the map. Like,
well, they're just not the best version of themselves we've seen. I think that's the bigger. That's like the
they're not even the best junglers in the league.
Looking at TL and TSM being like they're not even like the best TL TSM we've seen.
Yeah, but that's the tough thing. They're not even the best in the LCS. Like, there's plenty of other good. Like, you have a player who's better than those junglers. So already it makes it interesting, because on the one hand, those teams have been very good, but actually those junglers have been almost non-existent. So the question to me is like how much impact closer can have. Because I'm not talking about just purely getting kills in those big pop-off games. Just in theory, if you have the better jungler, if you play it correctly, you can have the advantage, because obviously you have like a numbers advantage in scenarios. You have control over the map. I could see this is where fans, you can't go at the moment, in my opinion, League of Legends like we used to 6 years ago, where we would do a playoff preview. Like, we would go lane for lane. Like, right, this player's better than that one. This is a wash. I sort of did that, but then my point is, the reason why I actually think there's sort of an ace up the sleeve of Golden Guardians is beyond having like the best mid laner, which is a pretty good advantage always in League of Legends. The next best thing to have, in my opinion, is really to have the much better jungler. Yeah. That can just win you, because that can make every lane better. That can make the whole map better.
I think for me too, closer has been just improving. I mean, he started out the year looking really good, but he hasn't really missed a beat. Jungler. Yeah, I think.
Bear in mind, Blabber has all those sick players around. Arguably the best jungler, I think. That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, we don't exactly. I wouldn't even say that we like go around sacrificing and doing a lot to make him amazing. I think he's just an insanely motivated individual with a ton of talent, and so I think regardless of like how we pick and whatever playstyle we're playing, he's always going to have a big impact. I think everyone has seen that. I think there's been like one game the entire year where it felt like he was having what I guess you would equivalize as like an Xfinity style game, right? Where he's more of the background than he is the foreground. So I can see why you're excited to see like what he can do to them. Obviously, I'm just as excited.
Do we have any early playoff predictions as we wrap up here? Just because I think that,
in what sense, who's going to win or something?
Yeah, we can say who's going to win. Like, let's put it this way. Let's say who is going to win and who is going to be the biggest disappointment in playoffs.
Ooh, okay.
Based on expectations. Okay. Because I feel like it's a pretty open playoff overall, given Cloud9's dip in form, and I think that teams like TSM and Liquid are very up and down.
You've opened the question I kind of wanted to ask, and I've been wanting to ask. What is success for TSM? Because I think a lot of people are like, get to Worlds, right? Like, that's like, I guess, them technically reclaiming their throne, arguably. And then some people are like, I mean, I guess just winning playoffs, right? Like, Worlds is irrelevant. I don't know where to draw that line, because with the decisions they've made and kind of like the backpedaling they've done decision-making wise, it ends up seeming super weird where I'm like, I'm pretty sure if they don't get out of groups, this year's a failure. Like, they could win the split, go to Worlds, not get out of groups, and still burn it down, right? Like, that's exactly where they were a couple years ago with many of the same players and the same staff.
Oh,
I'm really
by the way,
to see, like,
can you
what is the bar here, right?
If you want to talk about
different for different teams,
if you want to talk about a PR nightmare, imagine bringing Doublelift back, signing him in on extension, and then failing to get out of groups at Worlds again. Reginald, you may as well just forget blocking me on Twitter. Just delete your Twitter on that point in time. You don't need one.
That's the case. Well, I feel like for us, we all get that, and we're like, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense.
Listen, I don't think that expectation exists for TSM.
If they make Worlds, everything's fine, and I'm like, I think that's where
it's a difference between fan expectation and like reasonable. Like, put it this way, listen, as much as I clown on TSM doesn't have to win the split for me to think that they were good. Like, if they make the split final, I'll actually consider that a slight overperformance.
I agree with you, because I don't think TSM can win. I just don't see TSM winning two best of fives, one against Liquid and one against Cloud9.
They can't win against either team, because on either end of the equation they're squeezed, aren't they?
Yeah,
Cloud9 will bash them in the early game, and Team Liquid's just too good at punishing mistakes.
Yeah, so I think like best case scenario, they win one of those best of fives, make the final, and then lose the final. That's like the upper level of what I could see TSM doing.
let's tie this into the original conversation. This is where Double Elim can really help a team like TSM, though. If they can beat two of those three teams like twice and win LCS, they get even more credit.
Yeah,
that would be should get a lot of praise for winning this LCS split if you're anyone except for basically TL and C9, I think.
Yeah, I kind of feel like given the like scope of their decisions and how big everything was and how like weirdly unique it is compared to like wrapping their GM back into being their coach and like all the shifting they did around like trading Smoothie for Bio and then pulling up treats, like everything paths to this, like this has to be the split. It has to happen. If it doesn't happen, everything should be on fire and everyone should panic, right? Especially after they have finally locked Bjergsen down into the contract that they're super happy with long-term, presumably. Like, I don't see how you can be like, oh, this is a rebuilding year. We're figuring things out. You know, we got to Worlds, so like that's what we do. I was like, I feel like you have to get out of groups.
But in the same way, TSM hasn't been to Worlds for a few years now, so isn't making Worlds an uptick for them realistically? You do have to look at it that way.
I think if they had actually burned everything down, yeah, absolutely. If you bring in 4 new players around Bjergsen, a new coach, and maybe there's like a new GM or something, you have a whole bunch of stuff like that happening. Yeah, absolutely. Making Worlds is you starting to rebuild. I don't feel like there's been a rebuild, right? They just like took a couple of planks off and then like nailed some new.
They just didn't do a very good job.
Like they're obviously leaning on this like we're looking like 2016 TSM, but I don't know if people remember that they lost the spring finals in 2016. Like that TSM wasn't this like crazy dominant like the C9 we've seen now or TL we've seen the last couple of years, right? Like that's not even something that's maybe even worth leaning on in this case.
So what do you guys think? Who's going to win? For me, I think like Cloud9's just going to come back and take this again. I think that when we've seen them return to their early game form, which we saw a little bit more this last week. So there's a couple things that happened this last week that I find encouraging. They played a more patient game in the late game in their first game of this past week against Dignitas. And yes, it was against Dignitas, but they weren't making the same kind of overeager mistakes that we've seen previously. And I think this is where, even though they were losing some of those games where they were experimenting with new styles, I think the ability to pull those out in one game of a best of 5 is very valuable and something that teams have to carefully draft against. And they can always go back and do kind of the comfort early game that we've seen be so dominant from them. So I just think they have a versatility, and I think they're going to step up in these big games, and that is going to be really huge in a best of 5. So for me, I think C9 is still the winner. I do think that you guys are probably the ones that have the biggest capacity for kind of overperformance. I'm not
dark horse.
Yeah, I'm not terribly impressed with FlyQuest and EG right now. I think Golden Guardians is better than both of those teams. So
listen, we haven't got much time anyway, so we'll just do this to truncate it. Let's not talk about the low bracket teams.
We're not going to do time. That. so for me,
they're not winning. Spoiler, they're not winning.
So for me, like if I had to pick my top 3, I'd probably go C9, TL. And then it's a hard pick between Golden Guardians and TSM, right? But for me, I'll take Golden Guardians right now.
Who are you picking to win, Dan?
I'm actually going to say, weirdly enough, I think FlyQuest. Like weirdly enough, I think
just like secret scrimming.
If it's not going to be us, I actually think that having like an early best of 5 can sometimes play in your favor. I think like it's a nightmare to face like TL in regular season best of 1s, but still they had reasonably good performances. I think if they can get the momentum off of upsetting TL, I think FlyQuest can close it out from there. But that's like the hardest part, is like beating TL right there. I think the rest of the tournament is actually considerably easier. But that's only if it's not us. Otherwise, I would probably say it's going to be TL. I think C9, like obviously on their, like when they're stable on their good days, can do it. But there's actually been a big question I've had about the C9 roster since they manifested it, which was, are they good at losing? Like, are they able to like stay stable? Are they able to stay consistent? I don't know these players like super well. They changed a lot since I left. But I will say like what we've seen since they started losing was this like inconsistency, even like against the lower teams where they won the games. Ultimately, they weren't the like super dominant, super crazy team we saw in spring. And I am concerned that if they end up in a position where they're down a game in a series, that like there's an absolute reality where they're just not able to pull it out in the same way that obviously like TL and TSM and even Fly have historically been able to do every single playoffs. Because like, remember, the C9 of the roster is still actually very new. Like they are just this year showing it to us. And like they were only losing like one game every like 6 or 7 games prior. Now they've like lost a string, and I'm curious to see what happens if that happens in playoffs at all.
All right, Thorin, Who do you got?
Luckily he did the stupid FlyQuest pick first, so people won't remember the part where he said Team Liquid probably after that, because I was going to say Team Liquid, so he almost stole my thunder on that one. The problem I have is this, right? This is one of those ones where if I wanted to do the thing, like, put it this way, if I was on a desk and I had to give, like, try to be as objective as possible, I'd probably say Cloud9 probably somehow wins it, just because they've got such good players. It's like they've got so many chances in this format, and let's be real, if you drop down, you're probably just going to get to farm a couple of crap teams and get your shit together and then go and play the good teams. It's not like you drop down and it's like international, you play some killer team there and just get eliminated straight away. So the fact that there's like a bounce back factor and you can play someone twice, I think always adds a new dynamic. So part of me feels like C9 has a good chance. I mean, there's, like, let's be real, just in terms of best of fives, they could go to the finals after playing like 3 or 4 best of fives. That's like almost the entire split right there. Like, that's like playing another split. So in that world, maybe they can get good. But I have to say, I'm just going to say screw it and go with my heart, and I'm going to pick Team Liquid. And the reason why is this. If you notice, I was one of the only analysts in the entire world, this is real, you can go back and check, where, like 2.5 weeks ago, where Rogue and Team Liquid were both second in their leagues, but they were like tied for the top. And the discussions weren't, wow, props to those teams for being second. It was like, they're not even the second best team. They're just fake second. And I said at the time, like, people are mad overrating them because both teams were getting dissed in the same way. It was like, they're just winning in a one-dimensional way and through these couple of players. And I was like, homie, that's League of Legends. What are you talking about? Like, unless you've got a time machine or we're going to go to like a different game, that's just what we're playing. So if the game is the same now, guess what? I'd love to think that those comps that Rogue drafts would win in the playoffs because they look awesome whenever they play them against anyone. So in LCS, I'll say the same thing. This is where analysts, by the way, there's a little aspect people don't know about analysts, which is you have to make a choice as to which of the narratives you're going to emphasize on a broadcast, because there isn't enough time to do what we do in a talk show and have like a half an hour segment on one team's play. You have to sort of pick, right, my angle is, I thought they were going to be in, so a classic example I'll give you. If anyone knows CSGO, this is a straight fire little gem I'll give you there. You'll enjoy watching the broadcast. Is, right, in CSGO, one of the main analysts is a guy called Pimp, who's Danish, right? And so because he's Danish and the best team in CSGO the last couple of years was a Danish team, it was Astralis, he always bigs them up and hypes them to the heavens, right? Every time they play, he makes it sound like, of course they're going to win because they're the best and the pride of Denmark. So here's a little hint for you. Every time they lose, you might naively think, well, he's biased, and so he's probably going to make excuses. No, he will always flame them harder than someone who hates Astralis. Because what he does with his narrative segment is punish them for making him look so stupid. So now if they lose even closer, he'll be like, oh, they were dreadful. Like, what were they thinking playing like that? They didn't practice properly. So along those lines, right, I feel as though what everyone did all split long to Team Liquid was just because they came in with this frame of mind of, like, they haven't integrated Broxer, which I agree. As a team, they don't look like they have mad variety in their pools. That's correct. They don't win proactively early in the early game. So they haven't got any of the things people traditionally want from a top team. But they remind me of old Team Liquid in as much as if you let them get to a certain point in the game, and forget if you let them, people can't stop them getting there. If they get to that point in the game with their limited champion pools, which you also can't stop them getting because they've got enough of them for each role, then they win the game. Now, here's the thing. You can look at that and go, what are you talking about, Thorin? Loads of those were close games, all the rest of it. Yeah, you know what happens when Cloud9 or TSM wins a close game? They get props for being clutch, you motherfuckers. That's how you spin the same narrative. So what I'll say is this. I love that Team Liquid and C9. It's sad that people bury these. People, unfortunately, in journalism, ruin all like cliches by using them too much, because these are the best examples of the like unstoppable force and the immovable object. Like, Team Liquid cannot be moved once they reach that point in the game with their picks. So it's funny that everyone says they don't even pick enough champions. Yeah, and you know what? They're mad comfortable on the ones they do. One of the reasons I think Jat's done an awesome job with this team is when you tell me they only win through a couple of players and they have no jungler. How the fuck are 4 players who don't even seem to have mad synergy playing well together and not losing close games? That is called comfort. You have made those players have a stable mindset where they don't even need the jungler to be on the map. They don't even need this teammate to be working with them super. They just play individually well. So I think actually, I can't listen. They've never played any best of fives with this team, so I can't be like confident they're going to win. But I'm just going with my heart. I'm just picking them. Like, what I've seen in the best of ones, I think can translate to the best of fives.
It also goes back to, remember how SK Telecom in 2015, everybody was saying, oh yeah, their early game's so bad, and they would just turn things around and win late games.
Team, yes.
Guess who won Worlds that year? It was SK Telecom, and they won it with that play style. So it does tilt people though, that these teams that like fall behind early and then win through.
It's just not as satisfying as it is stomping someone. Like, Cloud9 stomping always looks more fun. I'll also add to one thing that Danan said there as well, actually, which is The reason I've also never been 100% in on Cloud9, like I'll give them all the props in spring because they were so clearly better.
Yeah.
But the reason I was even one of the only people who considered it a risk to swap Svenskeren for Blabber is exactly what you've seen since Cloud9 fell off. It's the same scenario. Like, this is where, again, narratives get out of control. If you'd listened to narratives at the end of spring, you'd have thought Blabber was like the second coming of who pick your greatest jungler of all time. Instead, I always said this, even when they were winning. I said, this is the one thing you always have to bear in mind. Until I see otherwise, my problem is the genius move that Blabber makes, where he goes in and Nisqy follows up and the team's ahead and they win that fight, even though it's inconceivable. Just wait, because he'll do that when they're behind and they're losing the game. And when he does that, they'll back off like you have to when you're not ahead, and they will have to let him die a bunch of times in these games.
Well, what if you're not surrounded by those players?
That's another thing I always thought. Dude, I also wondered the same thing. Like, what would happen if Blabber was in a bad team? Like, would he be popping off like this? I think people would be flaming him for inting.
They were also set up previously off of Svenskeren's MVP split they are a team that was set up to enable a jungler stylistically as well. So you have to factor that in. Also, is that sure he had a great split, but he was also slotted into a system specifically to benefit him, right?
Yes.
I've got two things though. I want to say one, this is the earliest game-centric year we've had. Just statistically, everything aligns saying these games are ending insanely fast, even at high levels of play. I think LCS is one of the slower ones, but that's because our like most stable teams are like TL and Fly and TSM, who like consistently are good late.
It's also the factor that it's not just the game length, it's that the win percentage when you get ahead by a certain amount of gold at a certain time period is highly predictive right now.
It's fascinating with the amount of anti-snowballing in the game, but that's a separate issue. The second thing, we haven't even talked about EG, which is fascinating because this should be a huge thing, right? They're using only one of the players that they ended up paying an insane buyout for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was meant to be like a huge statement, right? Like we're coming in and we're just going to be one of these top teams. Do you think coming in on the 6th seed in summer is really like, are they validated?
No.
They feel validated. They're like, we beat Liquid a couple times this year. Even though Liquid got like 7th or 9th in the spring split. I'm really curious, like, what are the thoughts on EG? Are they bombing out to Fly and then they're just like having a really close match?
I think they're just
against the 100 Thieves.
They've made themselves a worse version of Liquid and FlyQuest.
Okay.
With the changes that they've made, and it's not that I disagree with the changes because of the direction the meta is heading. I think you just had to I think it was smart to do that. But I just view them as like the inferior Liquid and the inferior FlyQuest.
Okay.
My problem with EG is, with the lineup they've got now, they are not going to be relevant in these playoffs, in my opinion. Like, they have no chance whatsoever to win. I don't think they can do anything. Like, they don't have many advantages anywhere. They got it together and qualified. They were looking bad enough that they might not have if they hadn't. So I get why they had to do the move. To me, the whole premise from EG, when I saw them make those moves, was, right, put this split on pause. This is about next year having Huni and Jizuki in the team at the same time. And if we can do that, now we got a different team. And now that would be a team that would be quite interesting to watch.
Or any other mid laner.
Oh, yeah, whatever. I've written EG off at this point in time. Because the problem as well was, what I enjoyed about EG was that high variance playing style. That's just gone now. That just doesn't exist in the game anymore. For them.
Yeah. All right. So let's wrap it up. Thanks, Danan, for coming on and talking about this. Absolutely. We're 40 minutes late to get Crownshot on the show. So we're going to take a quick break and do that and then talk all about LEC playoffs. See you in a couple.